One fine winter day, the Duke decided to take a responsible step. He knelt down, presented the box with the ring, and offered to make the Duchess the work of his life. Rebecca was so happy that she agreed without hesitation, saying that if she had to be reborn, she would accept the offer again. But she could not have imagined that she would actually become a work of art in the house of Geoffrey Devonshire. The Duke selected jewelry to match the dresses, deciding what was appropriate and what was not. He shouted at the servants for bringing the wrong stones and necklaces. Rebecca asked if she could go to the party, because she hadn't seen her friends for a long time. But the Duke immediately said that it was time for her to remember that she could only go where he himself went. Rebecca said that at all the events with him, he does not let her say a word and does not allow her to communicate at all. The Count pretended not to hear his wife's words and cursed the servants in a commanding tone. After the wedding, Geoffrey locked Rebecca in a golden cage, not figuratively, but literally. The Duchess was simply a beautiful doll in the hands of the man she thought she loved. Until one day, the court physician told her that she was pregnant. Rebecca understood that a child in their family would become another toy for the Duke. She collected some things and decided to run away at night wherever her eyes looked. The Duchess got a job as a cleaner in a cafe. It was hard, but recently she finally felt free. Her hands became rough. Her facial skin was not so well groomed. But all this was a trifle. The main thing was that she and the child were free from the tyrant. As they say, joy does not come without trouble. One night, Rebecca woke up to a hand touching her face and was horrified. Sitting down, she saw Geoffrey in front of her. He was smiling slyly, looking into her eyes. The Count said that the girl was too stupid and naive, that she thought no one would find her. But then the Duchess saw that her daughter's crib was empty. There was no child in it. She shook the Count by the shoulders, begging him to tell her where her newborn baby had disappeared to. But Geoffrey grabbed her by the face and rudely told her that she had turned into a miserable pauper. Rebecca pushed away and ran into the hallway to find her daughter. Not far away on the stairs, she saw her former maid Alicia with a baby in her arms. She moved towards her and began to say that Alicia was the only person she trusted, and she betrayed her. But as I held the little girl tightly to my breast, the servant said she had no choice. The Duchess became angry and demanded that Psyche, her little daughter, be given back. But at that moment, Geoffrey grabbed her hair hard and pulled her towards him. But then he abruptly pushed her to the floor and said that she had gone crazy, but he already had an excellent replacement. He again tried to approach the Duchess and wanted to grab her, but she bit him sharply on the hand until it bled. The Duke jumped back, as if stung, and pressed his other free hand to the bleeding wound. And Rebecca was full of anger and rage, her eyes glowing with fury. The Count, full of anger, said that he would like to keep her alive in memory of past feelings. But after what she had done, that would not happen. Rebecca tried to open the door, but it was locked from the outside, and she couldn't get out on her own. The room began to fill with fire. The flames spread too quickly. From the smoke, fire, and hot air, the lady fell to the floor completely exhausted. She mentally asked fate to fix everything. After a moment, her heavy eyelids opened, and she saw the maid in front of her in a blur. Rebecca opened her eyes and couldn't believe what she saw. She was safe and sound in the palace, with her faithful servant by her side. The girl caringly asked if the lady was feeling well, and then added that it would be possible to reschedule today's event. Seeing all this and not fully understanding what was happening, Rebecca thought she was in heaven. But as soon as the maid opened the door of the room, they were in. Rebecca immediately realized that this was not heaven at all, but hell in the full sense of the word. She returned to the past, to that very terrible moment, the day of her husband's wedding. It was her own husband's second wedding. Immediately, the magnificent Geoffrey appeared in a dazzling suit and white festive gloves. The couple was very beautiful. The bride was young and beautiful. The groom was also handsome. But Rebecca looked at all this without any particular joy or happiness for the young people. The ceremony was very touching. The newlyweds exchanged rings and vows of fidelity. They walked down the red carpet smiling at all the guests as they congratulated them. And then Geoffrey's gaze stopped. Among the crowd, he noticed his recently adored first wife. His eyes sparkled like two diamonds, and he, smiling sarcastically, said that one should smile at a wedding and not be sad. The girl immediately remembered this look. It was always so pleasant and kind for everyone, but cold for her. And at that time, she took it for sincere love and care. Alicia was found by Lady during her walk in the park. The young girl was so weak that Rebecca took her in and cared for her until she fully recovered. When Alicia recovered, she charmed the lady so much that she kept her with her without a second thought. Rebecca offered her to become a maid, because after the wedding, she had no more friends and she was lonely. They chatted for hours, laughed. The girl braided the lady's hair and told various stories. But one day at dinner, which was in honor of Alicia's birthday, Rebecca noticed the girl's strange behavior. She refused to eat, even though her favorite dishes were prepared. Rebecca learned that Alicia was pregnant with her husband's child. I immediately rushed to Jeffrey's chambers to clarify the situation, but he was calm as always. Jeffrey blamed his wife for what happened, since it was she who brought the young lady into their house. He also added that the girl was too close and too beautiful to pass by her beauty. Rebecca couldn't say anything in her defense, but he continued. The lady apologized that they had not had a child in 10 years, but she could not believe that this would happen to her. Now he will take the lady's closest servant as his wife. Rebecca sipped wine and watched as all the surrounding guests rejoiced at the new couple. And after a while, the carriage carried her home from the noisy celebration. She drove and thought about how this could have happened to her, but the question tormented her even more. What could have happened to the child she had been waiting for so long from her beloved husband? Little Psyche, whom she rocked in her arms for such a short time. Beautiful moonlight fell on her from the carriage window. She imagined that her daughter, like her, would be a beautiful doll locked in Jeffrey's cage. Rebecca turned her gaze out the window, trying to drive away all bad thoughts. She understood that if she returned here again now, she would no longer be the same, and she needed not to make peace, but to fight with the Count. The carriage quickly sped past some men in the forest. One tall, dark-haired man managed to catch Rebecca's sad look. The cat sitting on his shoulder said that the owner was captivated by the depth of her blue eyes. The man didn't like this. He only said that he had seen this young lady before, accompanied by a count and without emotion. But the cat did not continue the conversation and ran away. Then another man came up. It was the master's servant, and said that the carriage was coming from the wedding. The brunette said that this was his land, and he did not want to see the gaff with his numerous guests here. The handsome young man asked why the lady was traveling alone, but the servant explained that the Count had married for the second time. And so a new day came. Rebecca was again in the palace, but although she was considered the mistress of the house, this was only a convention. All the work was done by maids and butlers, and the lady could not even command them without permission. Previously, when asked about business, Jeffrey would answer that he would take care of it himself, and her job was only to be present near him. And now she is in the new status of a second wife, again at the threshold of the same house. She remembered that the Count had a very strong passion for art. Rebecca thought it would be nice to smash everything there to smithereens, but this is too difficult to implement, since the room is locked and heavily guarded. Her family, or rather she, also became part of this art in the Jeffrey Gallery. To drive away these sad thoughts, the lady decided to take a walk in the garden around the palace. But then Alice ran up to her and carefully covered her with an umbrella from the sun. The maid said that it was too sunny today, and therefore she would be happy to accompany him on a walk to protect him from the rays. Alice was always there in that life, at the most difficult moment, when her husband's wife gave birth, and it was too difficult. Alice secretly took her to the village festival, and they gorged themselves on all sorts of delicious things. But this joy was followed by a terrible punishment with a whip for Alice. Jeffrey beat her so badly that she lay in a pool of her own blood, dying in front of Rebecca. The lady felt guilty and wanted to repay this sacrifice. When asked what the maid's greatest wish was, she only laughed in response. Rebecca took the maid's hand in hers and said that she was ready to fulfill any wish for her. Alicia replied that her most important wish was for her mistress to be healthy and for her to always be there. And so, while chatting carefree, they walked through the garden. Once inside the palace, Rebecca climbed the stairs and kept looking at the third floor. This was the highest place, and only the Count could look down on everyone from there. This staircase led to an office, the door to which was always closed. Perhaps there is a secret there that he is hiding from everyone, and it will help Rebecca overthrow him. But suddenly, a guard blocked the way and said that he could not go up any further. The girl turned sharply in the other direction and said that she knew the rules of this house. Returning to the chambers, Alice asked if Rebecca wanted to go to the Count's office. The The maid once again clarified that she noticed the girl looking at the third floor, which is where the Count's office is. Rebecca shared her desire to get there, even if only for a few minutes. Alice said that now was the perfect moment. The Count had left, and the guard was relaxed. She playfully said that she would help distract the guards, and the rest was up to the lady herself. And so, a few hours later, Rebecca is in the office, something she had never managed to do in her life. Approaching the table, she immediately came across the first drawer and decided to open it. There were a lot of different papers there, and in them were written many names, some known to her and some not so well. She grabbed the stack and began to read quickly. Her father's name was on it. Among the documents was a paper stating that Obelia's family already had the right to own the land, and then immediately went bankrupt. Then again and again, in these papers, there was a whole dossier and step by step how Jeffrey led her family to poverty. It was still a long time before they got married, as the dates on the documents showed. And a little further on, she discovered letters in which her friends swore that they would not communicate with her. She remembered how the Count had said that her father had asked for a loan again, but had not refused his father-in-law, although his treasury was not unlimited either. He then convinced her that everything he was doing was only out of love for her, but it turns out that there was a clear plan of action. But then the documents fell out of her hands, and she sank to the floor and began to quickly collect them. Suddenly, the office door swung open, and Jeffrey appeared on the threshold. He immediately said angrily, "What the hell is going on here?" Rebecca was scared and didn't know what to expect from this man now. She was the first to go to meet him and immediately presented all the arguments she had just read. Throwing the papers right in his face, he only said right away that she could have ruined his suit. Then he picked up one sheet, read what was in it, and said that there was nothing special there. The girl was upset by this and asked how it was possible that he was to blame for her having no friends and her family going bankrupt. His voice became more and more menacing, and he added that he should have chosen his friends more wisely from the start, and this would not have happened. And then he grabbed her by the waist and added that her father himself was to blame for what happened to his business. She tried to push him away and said that everything was set up from start to finish. First, the man sent to persuade the father to invest in a losing business. At the next stage, he himself volunteered to help her father with money in order to save the situation. But then the Count, as if trying to look her in the eye and convince her that he was right, said that she should remain silent altogether. Rebecca saw that evil husband in front of her again, but before she would have unquestioningly agreed with everything. And now she listened to everything simply in silence, but passions raged in her soul and her blood boiled with hatred. He kissed her and said that his wife should behave much more modestly and that it wouldn't hurt for her to tidy herself up. Some time later, the lady was already in her bed and in her chambers. When she opened her eyes, she saw in front of her her husband's new wife. Rebecca sat up and asked if she had really spent the whole night there. Alicia replied that she considered it her duty to take care of the Duchess while she was unwell. Rebecca didn't like this at all and found it quite strange, since she had just gotten married and was being bothered by her. At first, this sweet girl took away her clothes and jewelry. Then she took the most precious thing at that moment, my husband. The night Rebecca escaped, it was Alicia who opened the gates for her and then betrayed her. The girl asked guiltily, "Is it really true that after so much time, the lady despises her and cannot forgive her?" Rebecca laughed and said that the girl made her own choice. Alicia became angry and asked what choice the Duchess was talking about. Then she calmed down a little and said that she had no choice. Jeffrey would not leave her alone, but Rebecca hastened to remind the girl of the events of not-so-distant days. On the day when the lady found out about the pregnancy, she offered a lot of money and to run wherever her eyes looked. But Alicia said that she is an adult and can decide for herself what to do with her child. And then she added that since she was an adult, she should not make excuses now, but be responsible for her actions. Alicia hung her head guiltily and said she just wanted to help. Rebecca said that they are now both wives, and they have one husband, and he will not like it if they quarrel. Rebecca walked up to the jewelry box and said that she wanted to thank her again for spending the whole night with her. There were a lot of beautiful earrings with expensive stones in the box. But then the Duchess said that the girl could choose anything except the family heirloom. Alicia clarified why she didn't have such a relic if she was now the Count's legal wife. But the Duchess said it with a touch of sarcasm, probably because she was not of noble origin. At that moment, Jeffrey came into the room and asked how the girls were doing. And then he turned specifically to Rebecca with the request that she should bring her face into a more decent appearance. Coming closer, he added that it would be necessary to go to a dinner party and that it was necessary to look very good. Alicia clapped her hands and was very happy to get ready for the party. Jeffrey said that she didn't need to get ready anywhere. She would be at home. He would go with Rebecca. Then he added that such events are only for people with titles, and she is not one. To prevent Alicia from causing a scandal in front of his first wife, he hastened to send her away. But at that moment, Alicia said that she wanted the relic as a gift for herself, and Jeffrey didn't like that. Rebecca explained that the necklace had accidentally been lying in the box when she wanted to give the girl something as a thank you gift. This left the Count a little stunned, and he was unable to answer immediately. And then he said that he couldn't give her the same thing, since she didn't have a title. And the girl screamed. The Count quickly hurried to lead the girl out of his first wife's chambers. Finally, Rebecca asked why they returned so quickly from their honeymoon. Alicia immediately blurted out that the Count had sold the estate where they were supposed to vacation for a few paintings. Once again, Rebecca was surprised that his passion for art remained intact. And so, having changed into her evening attire, Rebecca came to the chambers of her supposed husband. He saw how beautiful his wife looked and couldn't hide his smile. For a moment, Rebecca forgot all the terrible things that had happened between her and her husband. And he said that she looked the same as she did on the night of his 17th birthday. That night, there were many guests in the castle in his honor. But he, still a young man, went out onto the balcony because he was bored with all that fun. And downstairs, two girls were arguing, so they called Rebecca to settle the matter. And that was their first meeting. The girl laughed because of a stupid argument, and the guy really liked her laughter. He looked at her and couldn't take his eyes off her. And that's when he came up with a plan. When Rebecca raised her huge blue eyes to him, he was even more captivated by her beauty. Her eyes radiated light and sincerity, and her smile was mesmerizing. It was at that moment that he decided that this girl would look very beautiful in his ideal world. She was perfect for him as a beautiful doll in his empire. And now she smiled just like she had that evening, as if nothing had happened. And Alicia watched with resentment as they cooed from around the corner of the door and felt abandoned. Jeffrey said that the carriage was ready and they could leave. They arrived at the palace of the emperor himself. Meanwhile, Duke Johannes did not want to appear at the same ball in honor of the victory in the war. But his servant Croa insisted and explained that the evening was in honor of his victory and he could not go. He added that the maids had already brought him his formal suit. The Duke said that he didn't like all this noise, and he wasn't interested in seeing all those gentlemen. Croa said that the emperor personally wishes to praise the winner. The Duke said that he didn't even make any effort. As long as they had a talisman like a cat, it wouldn't be difficult for him. Once upon a time, the goddess Daphne bestowed a gift that gave great power to people. People could mentally connect with cats, and thus became stronger. They were spirits. Cats appeared everywhere and felt like they were in charge. But people were so carried away by their own power that they committed a sin right in the church, for which they angered the goddess. She became angry and turned her gift into a curse. The goddess forever united cats and people, and only the strongest in the family could survive. People began to marry very early so that they could have the opportunity to have more children. Julian Johansen was no exception. He was strong in his own right and needed to get married quickly. His father warned him in every possible way that he was now responsible for their family. But the boy resisted and did not want the curse to continue, and he also did not want to involve an innocent girl. But the father said that this was their fate, and that, alas, he could no longer fix anything. His descendants had sinned too much. But the exhausted mother told her son that he should not fall in love, otherwise it would be even more painful. Soon his mother passed away, and his father found a replacement for her. Meanwhile, Julian was growing up and was in no hurry to start a family, and especially heirs. But he also understood that if not him, then his sister Lily would have to answer. But the girl was too young and innocent to pay for someone else's sins, and he gave himself his word that he would be the first to break this endless circle of curse. Meanwhile, the ball in the palace of His Imperial Majesty was in full swing. Jeffrey and Rebecca also appeared in the hall, and the girl looked for the Duke with her eyes. He didn't keep us waiting and soon appeared among the guests. The emperor immediately approached him and thanked him for the excellent battle, And without wasting any time, he noticed the red-haired girl standing in the distance. It was the emperor's daughter, Princess Cantrin. The duke immediately realized that the emperor wanted to marry his daughter to him in order to become more powerful due to his gift. The emperor looked at the duke with some ambiguity, but Julian became famous as a Casanova, changing ladies like gloves. But the emperor was apparently not bothered by the gossip. He persistently recommended the princess, and he invited the young people to dance and chat closer. The princess immediately liked such a distinguished duke, but the man could not refuse the emperor either. The emperor, for his part, also saw benefits both for his family and for his position in the country. The young people began to whirl in a dance, but looking at this young lady, the duke imagined his mother and remembered her words. And nearby Rebecca was dancing, and she was also watching the duke. She had her own plans. At that moment, Geoffrey turned her head towards him and said that she should only look at him, but the girl quickly got her bearings and said that she was just feeling dizzy. The music ended, and the count led his wife to sit down and rest. But as always, Rebecca found herself in the farthest corner of the room, far away from everyone. And Geoffrey went off to have fun with the other guests, forgetting about his wife as an unnecessary thing. The duke was standing and drinking wine when he heard a conversation behind him. He turned and asked if the pleasant female voice was speaking to him, but the girl said that it was better not to attract attention and pretend that everyone was doing their own thing. She also added that among the guests, there are people who are currently following them. This confused the duke, but he could not understand who this girl was and why she started this conversation with him. But she continued and said that she knew how to help get rid of his cursed gift. The duke made a calm face, as if this topic did not concern him in any way. But a little later, he became more talkative, because the girl was citing too many facts from his life. He asked what she wanted in return for her help, and she replied that the duke should invite her to dance in front of everyone. He didn't like this turn of events, and said that he wasn't going to do it, especially if he was forced to. The girl had said everything and had nothing more to add. The choice remained with the duke. But the duchess had already retired to her place. He only had time to ask her name. The girl turned around and coquettishly said that her name was Rebecca. At that moment, Geoffrey approached her and began to scold her for behaving inappropriately in public. Then the count turned his gaze to the duke, standing to the side, and said that it was ugly to stare at someone else's wife like that. He couldn't miss the fact that he had been offended, and he put his glass on the waiter's tray. Geoffrey was one of those who never shared what belonged to him with anyone. His wife was his property. It was like this since youth. Young people already at a young age opposed each other. But Geoffrey already had a weakness for beauty. He could be bribed with objects of art. He also considered his wife a work of art, and, like his paintings, only he could admire her. He hurried to take Rebecca to another part of the banquet hall, but tried to do it as nicely as possible in public. Everyone present, looking at this, whispered that he was a very delicate and gallant husband. But the emperor himself could not help but notice this situation and asked what was going on. At this moment, the duke caught up with the departing couple and said that he had a question. The count reluctantly said that he was listening, but Johannes said that the request was for his wife. Julian simply asked if Rebecca would like to dance with him. She had asked the duke about this earlier, but she didn't think that he would decide so quickly. Geoffrey pushed her and told her that she should not agree to dance with anyone but him. Here the emperor intervened in the dialogue and said that there was nothing wrong with dancing with another man, and he allowed it. Then the emperor turned to the count and said that his wife had already danced only with him at the ball, so he insisted. Turning to Julian and Rebecca, he said that he personally gave his approval so that they could dance. The emperor immediately noted that the duke most likely had a craving for other people's wives, and that he could later use this against him. But Geoffrey would not allow this dance, and accused the duke of treating his wife rudely. Julian extended his hand to the lady and once again invited her to dance. She readily agreed, because it was her plan, and it turned out to be very useful. The duke, in gratitude for her consent, tenderly kissed the lady's hand. And then beautiful music began to play, and they began to dance. Here Julian began his conversation about why she wanted to help him with the curse, and what she wanted in return. Rebecca was a little scared at first that he started the conversation so abruptly and immediately, but then she realized that she would not have another chance. She began the conversation by saying that everyone knew that his husband now had another wife. The duke couldn't help but make a sarcastic remark, and asked if she was looking for a second husband. She laughed and said that, on the contrary, she wanted to get a divorce and then have him take her as his wife. Julian didn't understand whether it was a joke or not, but the girl repeated that she wanted to marry him and help him with the curse. But the Duke asked her why she needed all this, and what this marriage, which would only be on paper, would give her. Fluttering in the dance, she said that from the Duke she would have the magical power of a curse, and this will help her to break and trample the Devonshire family. Geoffrey's world will collapse. Then she simply added that she was in no hurry to answer, and asked that Leo be sent to her at the palace with the answer. The music stopped. The dance was over, and Rebecca only said that she hoped the Duke would make the right decision. The Duke was in complete shock from what was happening. He still did not understand who this woman was, and how she knew all this. Rebecca thanked him for the dance, and said again that she would wait for an answer. She smiled sweetly at the Duke, and recalled that in her previous life, she had never had the opportunity to communicate with him. At that moment, Geoffrey flew up to her and grabbed her hand sharply. He forcibly dragged her towards the exit, so much so that the girl was literally dragging behind him. On the street, Geoffrey put the girl in a carriage and told her to go home immediately. She meekly and silently agreed, realizing that at home he would not be so kind. But in the end, he shouted that she had disgraced him with her behavior today. The carriage left. He was standing on the street, and at that moment, the Duke approached him. Geoffrey turned around with an uneasy expression and said, Julian was following him around, but the Duke only said that he had no right to treat Rebecca like a thing. Then he said that his behavior was far from that of a real count, that the only thing that came from this title was his age and nothing more. The Count replied that it was not for him to judge, since he himself had a far from attractive reputation for a duke. But then cats appeared next to the Duke, but he began to calm them down. Julian's eyes sparkled like a cat's, but he said that, although the Count was a bad man, this was not the place to punish him. As he was leaving, the Count said that the Duke would greatly regret behaving this way. And then he started sneezing a lot. He had a terrible allergy to cat hair. Croa came running out into the street, out of breath, and asked what was going on. Julian looked puzzled and said that it was nothing serious, but he had decided to get married soon. And then he added with a smile that there was one small circumstance. His fiancée was still married. Meanwhile, the carriage brought Rebecca home. She came to her room and noticed that Alice was not at all talkative. Rebecca began to tell how the ball went, and then the maid cheerfully entered into a dialogue with questions. The lady shared that she had danced with the Duke and that the Emperor himself had insisted on their dance. The maid said she had heard only good news about him, but Rebecca, with tears in her eyes, said she wished she could believe it. But their dialogue was interrupted by loud footsteps and shouting in the corridor. Rebecca understood that her husband had returned, and that now there would be a showdown for his behavior. The door to the room swung open. The evil Count walked in, and the Duchess and her maid were kneeling on the floor. He said that he was glad that she admitted her guilt, but that this was not enough, and extended his hand to the maid standing behind her. She gave him a tray on which lay the whip. He began to hit Alice on the back with all his might, and say that the mistress's maid was responsible for everything bad. Rebecca couldn't watch it, and she begged for it to stop. She understood and admitted her guilt. Hearing these words, he smiled slyly and stopped torturing the maid. And then he sat down in front of his wife and said that now she should think about her behavior if she didn't want it to happen again. He stroked Rebecca's cheek, kind of sweetly, but at the same time with all the hatred that she allowed herself to communicate with another. The Count left and told the maids that today he would be with Alice, and that he would wash this wife and treat the beaten one. Rebecca immediately rushed to Alice. She felt guilty in front of her. But through her tears, the maid smiled and said that for her it was nonsense. The main thing was that her mistress was healthy. The lady pressed the girl to her chest and said that she would try not to subject her to such terrible torture in the future. But then Rebecca grabbed the maid by the neck and asked why she was smiling when Geoffrey took the whip. Suddenly, she remembered that it was she who helped her get into the office, and her husband appeared there a moment later. Only she knew about the actions that Rebecca had been performing in recent days. The girl pretended not to understand what was being discussed and tried to unclasp her mistress's hands. The Duchess was again overcome with memories that in the past, maids had been changed and transferred away from her very often, but this one had been with her for a very long time. She supported her in her thoughts and was always ready to help. She pushed the wounded maid away and realized that she was Jeffrey's man. Having collected her thoughts, the Duchess said that she knew about the punishment and betrayed her every day. But the girl also added that she had two options. She couldn't live like this, and tomorrow she would go and get fired. Rebecca suggested that she run away before dawn, and then Alice would remain alive and be able to build a new life. But she said that the lady has always been and will remain soft-hearted, and that is why her husband treats her like that. Rebecca asked the maid to clarify what exactly she meant. Alice said that the lady has everything, and she can live and be happy, but she is always dissatisfied with something. Rebecca was shocked by such words and said that she really didn't see that they had made a doll out of her without the right to a voice or opinion. The maid continued that the Count dresses her in the best clothes and gives her jewelry and his care, but she turns up her nose. Alice continued that many times she herself wanted to take a seat next to the Count. She looked at her mistress with contempt and said that she did not regret at all that she had served the Count. The maid began to reproach Rebecca for her bad behavior and to say nasty things about her. But then another girl appeared. The girl hit Alice on the head with a wooden object, and she fell unconscious to the floor. The stone-faced girl said the bath was ready. Then she easily grabbed the half-dead maid by the hair and dragged her. Left alone, Rebecca didn't know what to think and who to trust now, surrounded by Jeffrey's people. She sat on the floor, and huge tears dripped onto her thin hands. Rebecca didn't understand why all this was happening to her and why she was being betrayed by the people she trusted most. She tried to calm down, but her eyes seemed not to obey her, and tears flowed on their own. The girl didn't know how much time had passed since the maids had left, but the one who had prepared the bath never returned. It was deep night, and a huge moon was shining in the sky. Rebecca walked to the open window, and looking into the distance, asked fate for strength and a sign that everything would be okay. Meanwhile, a strange servant dragged Alice to the temple. Having pulled the girl inside the building, she shook her well until she came to her senses. Alice said that she could have been more careful. She had already had enough today. But the new girl remained silent, and the wounded maid tried to understand what was happening. Jeffrey and a man in a black cloak entered the building from another door. He praised the black-haired girl for a job well done. She nodded silently and said in a barely audible voice that she was glad to try. With a sly smile, the Count said that the one who recommended her was right in his fidelity, and he added that from tomorrow, she would serve Rebecca and report to him about her every step. He ordered his assistant to finish the job with Alice, and they left. The girl was left completely alone and in the darkness. And then a new day came. Rebecca woke up. There was a girl standing next to the bed. She introduced herself as Kana and said that from today, she was the new maid. Rebecca looked at the girl with great distrust. She understood that this was another of her husband's toys, which worked as ordered. But when the lady sat down at the dressing table, the girl handled her hair very carefully and deftly. Rebecca thought that this one had skills, and she was tormented by the question of what Jeffrey thought and knew about the events of the night. But then Kana herself said that the Count did not know any details about the conversation between Alice and the lady. The Duchess immediately became angry, grabbed the girl by the hand, and said that it was impossible to read minds so directly. But Kana said that she was on Rebecca's side, and that her words were the pure truth. She handed her an embroidered scarf and said that she kept it in memory of the life she had saved many years ago. Rebecca recognized the item. It was a scarf she had embroidered herself. The girl continued that many years ago she saved her from death, and now she wants to repay her in kind. When Kana was a child, her father wanted to sell her to a brothel to pay his debts. The owner of the establishment, seeing the fragile girl, said that she was too skinny and would not be able to work. The girl, looking around, was horrified at what her father was ready for and decided that she needed to run. At the right moment, she pulled her hand away and ran as fast as she could, without looking back. Wherever her eyes looked, she ran so fast that she didn't notice how she threw herself right under the horse's hooves. Rebecca stepped out of the carriage, still very young and naive, but very kind despite her noble title. But the father also ran after the girl and called her among the crowd. Hearing the voice, she became scared. Then Rebecca picked her up and carried her to the carriage. The girl said that she would ruin the dress, but the Duchess said that it was a trifle. They got into the carriage, and Rebecca noticed that the girl had a wound. The lady opened her small handbag and began looking for a handkerchief. She bandaged his hand and said that she would make more souvenirs like this later. But now he needed it more. And after the Duchess took the girl to the Libertas shelter, this scarf warmed her soul with pleasant care. And now, with tears in her eyes, she was glad that she had the opportunity to thank him. And the scarf was proof of her words. Rebecca looked at the girl with hope, and she really wanted to believe what she heard. Moreover, she remembered that when she gave such a scarf to Jeffrey, he accepted it as a trinket. Kana said that she was ready to prove her loyalty to the lady, and that she was not the Count's person. She wants to sincerely help the Duchess and be her devoted friend. Rebecca really wanted to believe, but the events of the last few days were frightening her. Kana said she wanted to prove that she was on the lady's side and could be trusted with everything. The lady replied that all this was well, but first she had to gain Jeffrey's trust. And for her personally, she wants a lock of the Count's hair, but not just a hair, but a tuft of unevenly cut hair. The girl said that she would do everything without any difficulty. At that moment, someone knocked on the room's window. The girls turned around and saw a cute cat. Rebecca said that the maid might be free for today. She opened the window and said with affection that this is what Leo is like. The cat stretched lazily and had a small chest around his neck. And in this chest was the long-awaited answer from the Duke. She quickly took out a piece of paper and began to read with delight what he wrote. Duke Johannes agreed to a meeting to discuss the upcoming deal, and then the lady immediately conveyed the answer that it would be better to meet at the Libert shelter and in fairly inconspicuous clothing. Then Julian turned to his sweet cat, but he was reluctant to make contact with him, and then he turned away completely. But the Duke said that the task was very important and could not be entrusted to anyone else. The Duke felt guilty towards his pet, but Leo was also offended. He considered himself the main cat, and any yard cat could do such nonsense. He looked at his master with complete contempt, as if trying to convince him with his eyes. And then he jumped down and said that he was going to eat and didn't want to hear anything else. The Duke told himself that he did not understand the purpose of this spiritual connection with the animal if they did not listen to each other. But then he turned his thoughts to the letter he had received and smiled slightly. He didn't understand whether he was indifferent or whether the lady's words spoken at the ball had touched him. The Duke wanted to get rid of the curse, but he did not understand whether he could trust a man he did not know at all. A new day dawned, but the castle was awakened by the Count's wild cry. The security guards came running at the noise, and the guys were shocked by what they saw. Someone ruined the Count's haircut during the night, cutting it off in clumps, and this made him terribly angry. They tried not to look at the Count so as not to laugh, but he shouted that they had to find the one who had played such a joke on him. Meanwhile, the lady woke up and saw a box on the bedside table. When she opened it, there lay an untidy lock of the Count's hair. Rebecca said through a smile that the maid had proven her loyalty. A little later, Kana entered the room and greeted me as if nothing had happened. She brought a tub of water so that the lady could wash herself after sleep. She asked how the lady slept, whether everything was okay, and added that the task was completed. The lady smiled and said she understood, and asked for the dullest clothes to be prepared. A little later, Jeffrey, Alice, and Rebecca were having breakfast at the same table in the living room. Then Alice asked the maid to bring another plate of food, as she was not full, but Jeffrey said that she had enough. Alice was upset and reminded that she was pregnant and needed to eat for two. The Count said that if she didn't control herself at least a little, she would become ugly and he would throw her out. But then Rebecca stood up and said that he was too cruel towards the pregnant girl. She looked at him with a sweet look and said that he needed to be kinder. Jeffrey glanced at her as well, and for a moment it looked like they hadn't had an argument the other day. He turned to the maid and said that she could bring another half plate for Alice. But then Alice got angry and said that she didn't want to eat anymore and didn't need half a plate. The Count also couldn't restrain himself and shouted that she was reacting too harshly to everything. But then Rebecca took him by the arms, calmed him down, and tried to turn it into a joke. He didn't expect such tenderness from her and immediately fell silent. But then, smiling sweetly, Rebecca added that it wouldn't hurt for him to cut his hair even shorter. He ran his hands through his hair and said that he agreed. Maybe a short haircut would really suit him. And then she coquettishly said that today she wanted to go for a walk. Would he mind? The Count tensed up and immediately asked where she was going. The girl said that she wanted to go to the shelter. She goes there often. Apparently he just forgot. Then the Count looked at her and said, "It's clear why she's wearing such a gray dress. And then he added that it was better to look like a beggar than to have all sorts of scoundrels sticking to her. She hugged him by the shoulders again and thought that a little trick allowed her to get what she wanted. Alice was tense and angry about all this. It looked like she was going to burst with anger. Meanwhile, the Duke and his servant discussed the upcoming meeting. Croa insisted that the Duke should live up to his status and not just walk around haphazardly. But the Duke was completely immersed in thoughts about the upcoming meeting. Croa couldn't believe that the Duke would be so influenced by a strange girl. Julian said to watch your language, because we are talking about the future Duchess. And in general, he added that one shouldn't speak badly about the girl. She offered to help. The Duke most of all wants to get rid of the curse. But Croa insisted that there was no solution for so many years. And then here she was. The Duke chuckled, but said he felt she was not lying. And then he added that first they would meet and she would lay out her plan. Croa listened and couldn't believe his ears. He had been with the Duke for so many years, and no girl had ever influenced him like that. He remembers him from the moment of his mother's funeral, and then the young Duke said that there was no one closer to him than him. Croa spent all his free time studying how to defeat the curse, but he never found the answer. And now a random lady beckoned, and he believes it like a child. Croa said that he would go to the meeting as well, and would not let the Duke go, although he was more worried about the lady. And so our heroes reached the place, Libert's shelter, where the children were running. Rebecca arrived there with her faithful servant Canna. The shelter staff approached her with care and said that they were very glad to see the lady there, and that her help was very valuable to them. One of the girls leaned over and said that the guest was already waiting for the lady inside. But somewhere nearby, there was a man in a cloak who was watching what was happening. Canna thoughtfully took it upon herself to make things easier. Seeing this, Rebecca became a little wary, but she was distracted by the abbess of the orphanage. Stepping inside, Rebecca bowed warmly and smiled as a sign of respect. But then she froze from the unexpected meeting. She recognized the servant of Duke Croa, as she had already known him in a past life. Having run away from her husband, the lady found refuge in the Libertine shelter. She met Croa near the shelter walls, but he was exhausted and looked rather useless. He told many people that he served as a butler in the Duke's family, but no one believed him, and only Rebecca noticed that he was telling things that only someone who was close to the ducal family could know. At that time, the Duke was very weak and bedridden due to a curse. She looked after him and was by his side, and he constantly talked about the Duke. But every time he uttered the word curse, he began to cough up blood. But on the day his life ended, he said that he had found a way to defeat the curse. The girl apologized and said that she couldn't tell everything right away until she realized that they would help her. She looked at the men with pleading eyes. Then the Duke turned to Croa and asked why he had not said that he knew this lady. But the servant waved his hands, denying that he was seeing her for the first time in his life today. Rebecca laughed and said that she would like to begin discussing their future prenuptial agreement. Croa left them, and they sat down at the negotiating table. The lady handed over the agreement. She said that in this document, she listed the main and mandatory points. These included a title, financial support, and the granting of a gift to crush Devonshire. The Duke read it carefully, but he didn't like everything in the agreement. The first thing he asked was why she would fulfill her part of the agreement only after the Count's death. Rebecca said it was personal, and perhaps she would share it with the Duke someday, but definitely not now. Julian then asked why there was a clause that said someone could have an affair without the other party's consent. He continued that, by the contract, they still became husband and wife, and that was unacceptable. Rebecca noted that disagreeing with this point meant that he was concerned about her reputation. He said that he wanted to correct this clause, otherwise the contract would not be signed. The girl said that she had drawn up this clause based on the Duke's interests, but was ready to change it. He threw the document on the table and said that either it was as he said or not at all. Then he added that despite the fact that this was their agreement, the marriage would be concluded according to the law, and those around them should believe in this. She listened to this and did not believe that the Duke was so caring. She said that she would fix everything now. You just need to wait a little. The Duke said he was in no hurry. A few minutes later, the girl handed the Duke a new document. He began to reread it again, as if for the first time. Then, he said that everything suited him and took his leave with the document in his hands. He walked over to the candle standing on the table nearby and set fire to the agreement that had just been signed. Rebecca watched what was happening in horror. When the papers had burned down, the Duke said that they were not going to betray or set each other up, and that this was unnecessary evidence. But then he turned to the lady and asked if she still wanted to betray him, but did not want to admit it. His eyes became as fiery as a cat's in the night. Rebecca laughed and said that she wanted to marry him as soon as possible. The Duke then asked what her future plans were, since the Count was quite strong and cunning. The lady asked if the Duke knew what the Devonshire Empire was based on. The Duke was very surprised that the empire was made up of people divided into certain zones. First come the hired workers. These are the maids and butlers. Then the vassals, who participate in decision-making. The third zone is the escorts, who must be nearby at any moment, and the knightly order, who guard the Count's secrets. But the most desperate take their place, and are called hounds, ready for the most vile feats. These people are subordinate not because of loyalty, but because of their weaknesses, which Geoffrey skillfully exploits. The Duke concluded that they needed to start with the hounds, as they would be easier to subdue. The lady said that she would try to find a way to remove the collars that the Count had put on them. The Duke liked the lady's way of thinking, but he was more interested in what his role was in this whole undertaking. She said that she wanted to open her own trading business, and she needed a business manager. Julian suggested that for now he could be an observer and provide funds for this performance. Then he calmly added that he had more than enough money and she could take as much as she needed. Rebecca laughed and said that it was difficult for her to leave the castle without the Count's supervision and that she needed someone to guide her. Then she looked at the Duke and asked what he knew about the Devil's Claw herb. This herb has a powerful poison, but few people know that it not only kills, but also heals and gives youth. If its leaves are processed, a very good dye is obtained, for which a lot of money is paid. The Duke specified that he needed to obtain these leaves, but the lady said that only those grown locally were suitable for this. Then Julian was completely confused about what he should do in this whole story. She shared the knowledge she knew from her past life. At that time, there was one botanist who discovered the properties of this plant. If you eat fresh leaves of the herb, a rash will appear, and the person will be sick for a long time. But when the disease recedes, the body is cleansed and rejuvenated, and youth is the most valuable thing the Count has. There was a time when he invested a lot of money in lady skincare. The only reason he loves her is her beauty. She added sadly that if there was no beautiful picture, then the Count would not keep it in his house and near him for long. This is the only way to stop being his legal wife as quickly as possible. The Duke looked at Rebecca with horror and did not believe that she was serious. After listening to her arguments and suggestions, he added that they should work hard. Then he said that from today on, they are considered business partners. And as a sign of this, he extended his hand to the lady to seal everything once again with a handshake. Rebecca returned home, and Geoffrey was waiting for her, reproaching her for arriving later than the agreed time. But then he immediately changed the subject and said that he changed his hairstyle on her advice. The girl immediately said with a smile that he didn't have to say anything. She noticed that the new style suited him very well. The Count came closer to his wife and said that he had been neglecting her for a long time since Alice's appearance. That's why he suggests that they spend the rest of the time today, just the two of them. Rebecca immediately remembered how he had tortured and tormented her in that life, and she didn't want to go back to that more than anything. But the Count said that she must take off these rags, put on her best dress, and come to him. And after some time, the maid was helping to button up the best dress. Rebecca looked at herself in the mirror and told herself that she was damn good looking. And now, as she was walking up the stairs to go up to the Count's room, she was attacked by fear. But suddenly, Alicia came up to her from above and asked if she was going to see the Count. Alicia said with childish delight that Rebecca looked very beautiful in this dress. The girl thanked him for the compliment, and a plan flashed through her head. Then Alicia continued that the lady's beauty is not eternal, because her current wife is much younger than her. Rebecca calmly said that she didn't mind if the girl took all the Count's attention to herself, down to the last drop. But then she added that if she gets pregnant, Alicia and her child will remain in second place. The girl's eyes filled with anger, and she clenched her teeth in rage. In 1 second, Alicia gave Rebecca a powerful slap. There were maids in the corridor who heard a noise on the stairs. In the ensuing fight, Alicia tripped and fell. Rebecca dropped down after her to catch her, and her plan had to be flawless. After the fall, the girl's face was scratched, but she only said that the surprise in her stomach saved her life. At that moment, the maids ran up to the stairs and asked how they could help. The Count himself came out into the corridor to hear the noise and find out what was happening at such a late hour. He saw Rebecca sitting and scratched and immediately ran up to her, pushing Alicia away. Looking at the servants, he angrily said that if there were scars on his wife's face, then everyone would answer with their lives. Rebecca immediately started talking about how Alicia was not at all to blame and that he shouldn't scold her. He was hugging his wife, and at that moment, Canna came running and said that she could take the lady to the room and call a doctor. The maid lifted the girl lightly and went to her chambers, and the Count turned to Alicia and said that she needed to be sent to the Palace of Light for an indefinite period. The girl begged and asked him not to do this, but the Count was not inclined. He said that until she learned to behave, she would know her place away from him. Meanwhile, Kana was bandaging the lady's injured leg and saying that she wasn't being too careful with herself. Rebecca laughed. Her face was covered with a bandage, but she was very happy about what happened. In that life, Alicia fell so much that she was released from the Count for 2 months. Kana asked how else she could be of help. The lady asked what was wrong with Alicia and what news there was from the guest Rebecca had invited. Kana said that the girl was punished and the guest would arrive, and the Count did not object, but on the contrary, supported her. And at that moment, an elegant lady in a red dress with a small handbag appeared on the threshold of the room. It was Rebecca's mother who arrived, whom she had not seen for a very long time. The mother said that she already knew about what had happened and asked why her daughter was so careless. The woman said she was worried and concerned about her daughter. Then Rebecca asked, if this was true, why didn't her mother write a single letter and find out how her daughter was doing? But Rebecca remembered the advice her mother had given her on her wedding day, that she shouldn't have a child with the Count, otherwise it would be a trap. The Count came to ask for his hand in marriage, but his mother was immediately against it, and they were able to refuse him at the first attempt. But then it happened that my father lost a huge amount of money due to bad investments, and Devonshire himself appeared on the doorstep with money and said that he was ready to help, but in exchange for marriage to Rebecca. Unfortunately, at that time, this was the only way out for their family. The mother held the girl's hand and said that they had to leave, run away, to stay alive. But Rebecca couldn't just leave everything like that, because besides her, there was also a sister and a younger brother, and the Count would destroy the family. But then her mother called her Rabbi. Tenderly and affectionately, the girl burst into tears, because that's what her mother called her when she was just a child. Here, Kana brought a handkerchief for the lady, and mother immediately angrily asked where this servant came from. Rebecca reassured her mother and said that this servant was her reliable person. Then the lady shared that she wanted to get a divorce and then remarry Duke Johannes. But Rebecca asked me not to tell anyone about this anymore, especially not my father. But the mother asked why she was going through such trouble, and after all, the Count was a very scary person. Rebecca said that she had thought everything through, and she had a plan, and she was asking for her help. And then the girl suggested that her mother join the business and become more financially independent. But she will definitely tell you all the details a little later, only on condition that she doesn't tell anyone. Mother left. It was already dark, and Kana asked if it was stuffy in the ladies' room. She replied that it was a little, because she couldn't go outside because of her leg. Kana picked the girl up in her arms and said that she would solve this problem now. Rebecca was pleasantly surprised by her maid's devotion. Kana reassured him that the gaff had left and that his hounds were not currently roaming the area. She carried Rebecca outside fairly quickly. Then Kana said that she would be her legs now and asked where the lady would like to go. Then Rebecca asked to be taken to her side of the rose garden. The girl asked the servant why she didn't ask her anything and wasn't interested. Kana replied that she completely trusted the lady and that if she decided to go to hell, she would follow her silently. Then she added that she did not wish any harm and was serving faithfully, and that she did not need any unnecessary questions. Kana suggested that they sit down on the nearest bench, since they had already walked quite a distance from the palace. But Kana suddenly heard footsteps nearby. A figure of a man in a black cloak appeared from the shadow of the lantern. It was Robert Crowley, one of the line of Kadir's followers, and the Count's faithful dog. He greeted the lady and said that it was a fine evening for a walk. But Rebecca did not believe his kindness, and said that she knew perfectly well that he was watching, as were many of the servants. But the young man tried to defend his right, that he simply went out to get some air. Then Rebecca said that it was difficult to bear a last name that you dislike, but at the same time help them. The young man asked how the lady knew such details of his life, but she added that she not only knew this, but could help him. Rebecca smiled and said that she was not in the best shape right now, but she was confident in her words. The guy looked at the lady with distrust. She was saying things that he had kept secret. She asked him if it was easy for him to be a follower of Kadir and know that the family was in danger. Rebecca added that she knew the boy's parents were under lock and key at the gaff, but she has important information and she is ready to share it. In Robert's past life, the Count killed him, and the reason was supposedly the guy's love for Rebecca. When Crowley's parents attended the funeral, they had tattoos of owl eyes on their foreheads. This symbol indicated that they were a line of followers of Kadir. But Robert had a scar on his forehead that covered this tattoo. Most likely the guy was hiding his involvement. Previously, people who had such tattoos were punished, and to avoid being identified, they tied scarves. Robert Crowley said that the lady was trying to be like the Count, and most likely he was the one who told this information. He wanted to come closer, but Kana blocked Rebecca's view. The girl laughed and said that she didn't look very well at the moment, but asked to give her a pen and paper. She quickly wrote something on a piece of paper. She folded it carefully and handed the package to the young man. He asked what it was and why he should accept this note. The girl explained that there was a clue there that he had been waiting for a long time, and that it would help him find his parents. The guy laughed and said that he would no longer fall for such tricks, as the Count had mocked him so many times. The girl poked him in the chest with the note again and said that she was not joking and was not lying. The guy took the package, but said that he couldn't be so naive. She had provided the information first. The girl said that she doesn't know that he is a follower of Kadir, and they don't deceive or betray. But the guy pointed to his forehead and said that the scar was a sign of tattoo removal, and he had long ago abandoned this belief. But the girl calmly replied that she wanted to take revenge on the Count, and that she couldn't do it alone. Robert Crowley said that he had been sitting in the pit for so long, waiting to get even with the Count. He mocked him so many times, gave him false hope for a normal life. The girl said that she believes that good wins, and the main weapon is the unity of forces. She extended her hand to the guy as a sign of cooperation, which shocked him a little. He said that he could not even dream of revenge, especially in alliance with such a beautiful lady. The guy stood for a while, as if thinking about the proposal, and then he fell on one knee before the lady and said that he was ready to serve her faithfully and truly for as long as necessary. They shook hands, and she asked him to find out as much information as possible from the hounds around Jeffrey. And Kana hurried to carry the lady back to the room so that none of the servants would suspect anything. Some time passed. A new day arrived. Rebecca had in her hands a whole list that Robert had managed to collect. On the list of hounds was a woman named Grace Duncan, the head maid. She stood out among all the courtiers in that she was very attached to the Count's family. Rebecca read the information and couldn't believe her eyes. There was a lot of new information there for her. As she turned over each new page, the lady's face was overcome with wild horror. For a while, she turned away from the window to somehow digest the information she had received. Then she reread some of the pages again to remember them in more detail. And then she called the maid and handed her all the documents. Kana asked what she needed to do with these papers. Rebecca replied that they simply needed to be destroyed so that no one else could find out anything. Rebecca also asked where the Count was now, and Kana replied that he had left, and it was time to act. At this time, Grace Duncan was scolding several maids in the courtyard. She was extremely dissatisfied with their work. But then Kana came into her field of vision, heading to the wing of the house where the man's servants lived. Duncan decided to see what was going on. But there was nothing suspicious. Rebecca was in her room. Meanwhile, Rebecca was meeting Robert in the backyard, dressed as a boy. He handed her a small package and said that the Count would not be back for a long time, and that she could leave quietly unnoticed. I just asked her to be very careful and more attentive to people. He showed her a passage under the foundation of the house and said that she could use it to leave the palace unnoticed. And now she was already sitting in the carriage, happy that everything was going according to plan. The carriage moved away and her house was left behind. She felt a certain freedom. Never before and alone had she gone so far. The carriage stopped and the girl asked the name of the man who gave her a ride. The man laughed and said that he was Adolf and that he sold coffee beans just nearby. The man left, and she thanked him again. Having reached the place she needed, she saw a very cute and strange house in the forest. There were signs posted everywhere with messages like, "Keep out. This is private property." Even in that life, she remembered a botanist who worked on research into the devil's claw herb. Most likely this was his laboratory, where he did not let anyone in. She began to knock on the door. After much knocking, the door swung open and Mr. McQueen stood on the threshold. The girl immediately smelled a sharp stench of cigars and began to cough a little. McQueen looked at the girl dressed like a guy from head to toe and continued smoking his cigar. She began to compose a legend about how she came here to offer cooperation. But Mr. McQueen said that he was already the 10th one this month and had nothing new to offer him. He advised the young man to leave quickly and not waste his time on empty talk. The door slammed shut, and then Rebecca remembered that she hadn't been driving empty-handed and knocked on the door again. Hearing the young man offer baked potatoes, Mr. McQueen happily invited the young man in. There were a lot of plants inside. They stood on tables on the windowsills, and there was a strong smell of tobacco. While devouring the baked potato, the botanist was very pleased and became more talkative. Rebecca immediately noticed that McQueen read a lot of literature about the herb that she was also interested in. The botanist finished his treat and began to ask the young man what business the road had brought him here for. Rebecca started from afar and first took the book and began to say that she had heard a lot about the miraculous herb. Then she switched to plants, and using her knowledge from her past life, she noticed that something was missing. There were spots on the leaves, and she assumed that the air in the room was quite dry. Mr. McQueen didn't like this. He decided that it was some kind of spy sent by the Count to check his research. There was some tension in the air, and the botanist directly expressed his dissatisfaction. He said that the Count had repeatedly sent his people to buy his work, but he was not selling it. The girl laughed and continued in a man's voice, saying that she wasn't going to buy it, but wanted to offer cooperation. McVean asked what kind of collaboration there could be between a young man and a simple botanist. Then he became wary and looked intently at the guy sitting in front of him. Rebecca said that her master, according to legend, wants to invest money in growing the devil's claw herb, and her boss is ready to build a greenhouse in Montpellier, the best port city. Then she added that he would be able to conduct his experiments in more detail, and the boss was interested in processing the leaves of this herb. McQueen did not calm down and pestered the young man with questions about whether the Count was this boss who was plotting something bad. But then Rebecca said that perhaps the botanist could offer a cup of tea on the way. McQueen immediately jumped up from his seat and apologized for being an inhospitable host. Left alone, the girl noticed a stack of notebooks. She opened one and immediately came across experiments conducted by a botanist, exactly in the direction that interested her. She read carefully and tried to remember. At this point, McQueen brought in a cold, ice-cold glass, and they resumed discussions about possible cooperation. But then the girl said that the botanist would need test subjects for his experiments, and he choked. Wiping up the spilled tea, McQueen asked again what the young man meant. She reiterated that more accurate results would require test subjects. Having finished their tea, they sat down opposite each other, and, looking into each other's eyes, Rebecca asked if he was ready to make a deal. He rose from his chair and said that he wanted to know what kind of employer was so secretive and generous. Rebecca said that everything has its time, but she needed to know the exact answer. The Count's men once tried to entice him, and he is very wary of deals. McQueen, adjusting his glasses, repeated his question, wanting to know who was so persistently interested in his work. The girl held out a gold pendant with an image of a cat. Taking it in his hands, the botanist immediately said that this was the most influential Johannes family. He bowed to the girl, who had been acting like a guy all this time, and asked where he should sign the papers. At that moment, a carriage arrived at Julian's palace. It was Rebecca's mother. She was impressed by the scale of the Duke's castle. She came to the Duke at her daughter's request to also conclude an agreement for cooperation. The Duke was flattered and pleased by this meeting. They sat down at the negotiating table over a cup of tea. Rebecca's mother first expressed her concerns for her daughter and what she was worried about regarding this whole war against the Count. The Duke said that he supports the lady in everything and will provide maximum assistance and support. He turned the conversation into a joke to ease the tension and asked if Mom was afraid of running a business. He said that when he met with Rebecca, She immediately said that she would transfer all important powers to her mother. The girl said that all this time their family was supported by her mother and his meager but still meager investments. She didn't want her estate to go to ruin. It was dear to her as a memory of her bright childhood. And the second point was Libert's shelter. She wanted to make it as valuable as possible. The Duke asked what wishes and plans there were regarding building a business. The woman handed over a piece of paper that outlined her thoughts regarding the shelter. The Duke studied it carefully and asked what the woman was guided by when making this plan. She replied that everything was simple. She proceeded from the fact that she herself would be interested in the subject. She also added that she suggested what might be of interest to ladies like her. The Duke said that the luxurious renovation would immediately attract attention, and gossip would begin, and the Count would expose their plan. The woman said that the rooms should be put into operation gradually, thereby covering the cost of the renovation. And then she added that there is no need to make everything too rich right away, so as not to attract too much attention. The woman had an entrepreneurial spirit and was confident. Rebecca's mother handed over documents with her work and said that these were plans for the beginning. Julian added, with a smile, that Rebecca had made the right choice when she chose her mother to lead the business. The woman looked at her watch and said that she had enough business matters for today, and it was time for her to leave. But then she turned sharply to the Duke and asked what attracted him to Rebecca. The question confused him a little, and he thought about it and asked himself again. And then, after a short pause, he replied that Rebecca was an incredible woman. Mom didn't expect such an answer and asked if she had understood it correctly. And then Julian, without hesitation, replied that she was the most incredible woman he had ever met. Meanwhile, the sun was already setting. In the backyard, Rebecca had just returned from the botanist, and Robert was waiting for her. He held the clothes and warned that the Count was not there yet, but it was not worth taking any more risks. Rebecca laughed and replied that this meeting was too important, and she could not delegate it to anyone else. She changed into a maid's clothes and noticed that the guy was holding a bouquet of flowers and asked what it was for. He gave her the diarrhea with tea, saying that it was just a precaution, just in case. And now they are already climbing the stairs. There is silence all around, and Rebecca is glad that everyone is busy with dinner. But suddenly, as if out of nowhere, the headmaid appears. She calls out to Robert and asks where the servants are heading. Robert did not lose his composure and said calmly that the maid was bringing tea for Madame. Having heard the answer, she added that Madame should not be kept waiting. Then she added that since they were going upstairs, they should inform Madame that Lady Fiola would be visiting tomorrow. Madame Fabiola Devonshire, caring mother and loving and beloved wife. And also, concurrently, the most terrible mother-in-law for Lady Rebecca. Every time she came to visit, she would mock her daughter-in-law and would offer to pick up the tea treats from the floor. But secrets could not be hidden in the palace, and when Geoffrey learned of his mother's behavior, he immediately drove her away. And then tomorrow came. A wheelchair was prepared for the lady so that she could go for a walk. Geoffrey was very happy to sit Rebecca down and tell her that everything was as per the doctor's recommendation and that she would get well soon. But then he quietly added that there was a chain attached to the wheels and that its length was just right for walking around the garden and no further. The couple's conversation was interrupted by the butler, who announced that Lady Fabiola had arrived. Geoffrey hurried to grab the stroller and said that they had changed their minds about going outside. But Rebecca interrupted him and said that, on the contrary, she wanted to go and say hello to her mother. When the canna brought the lady to the garden, serious passions were already flaring up between Alicia and Lady Fiola. At first she said that the tea was too cold and asked for more. Alicia quickly agreed and poured a new mug. But after taking one sip, Madame said that the tea was now too hot. Alicia silently got up from the table, walked up to the maid and slapped her in the face. The mother-in-law was shocked and asked why the girl did this, to which Alicia replied that the constant complaints about the water and the taste of the tea were all brought by the maid, so it was her fault. Lady Fiola became angry and began to shout that it was immediately obvious that the girl was not well-mannered, since she was of low origin. But even here, Alicia did not lose her composure, and mockingly said that the woman herself was not very tall, and that her son wanted to communicate with her. At this point, Rebecca joined the conversation and said that she needed to be more respectful to her mother-in-law. Fabiola Devonshire stood there, not knowing what to say. She had not expected such impudence from her second wife. The girl's attention turned to Rebecca, who had been brought in by the maid. The mother-in-law immediately said that she had heard about the girl's injuries and asked how she was feeling. Rebecca thanked them for their concern and said that everything was fine now and there was no reason to worry. And so the three of them sat and drank tea. Taking a sip, Rebecca realized that this tea was very familiar to her. She looked at her mother-in-law and seemed to wink at her. Then she turned her gaze to Alicia, and she had come up with a plan to be alone with her mother-in-law for a while. She tugged sharply at the free edge of the tablecloth, and the girl knocked over the mug and spilled hot water on her hand. Rebecca made a guilty face and said that she had accidentally touched the tablecloth. Alicia was seething with anger, practically boiling over and screaming that the lady wanted to kill her. She ran away screaming that she urgently needed burn ointment. Rebecca was left alone with her mother-in-law and said that Alicia was apparently nervous about the meeting. But Lady Fiola said that she understood that her actions were purposeful. But for what purpose? Was it out of jealousy? The Countess said that after her second wife appeared, she felt abandoned and unnecessary. For the first time, my mother-in-law showed some understanding and said that this girl had really broken her so much. And then she added with a smile that the Countess here was still only Rebecca, and no one could take her place. The Countess changed the subject to tea and said that she felt a familiar taste, and asked if her mother-in-law had prepared it. She readily agreed and said that she had a lot of supplies and she could share them with her. As she put the can of tea in the dresser, she told herself that it would be better not to resort to it. But suddenly, she noticed the silhouette of a cat in the window. Opening the window, she went to pour some milk that Kana had brought her, because cats drink it. But when she looked up from the milk jug, it was Julian, not the cat, who was standing in front of her. Earlier, Julian received a birthday greeting from his sister. The letter included a drawing in which she depicted them happily surrounded by cats. Every year on the Duke's birthday, Lily did this, but he didn't accept it. Croa asked what to throw out. Leaving the Duke's chambers, he was relieved to tell the maid at the door that Julian had left a gift. Then he said that he had changed a lot lately, and this action was also incomprehensible. Meanwhile, behind the doors of the room, the Duke was getting drunk on wine on his day. Then he heard quiet footsteps and realized that it was his cat Leo who had arrived. He jumped onto the sofa and looked at the owner. And he looked at him, but was already slightly drunk. The Duke said with some resentment that the cat was supposedly his second soulmate, but did not want to understand him. He looked intently into the eyes and said that he himself was the strongest of the family for the continuation of offspring. And the cat is an immortal soul, which was sent to this world only to watch how these heirs will die. Julian walked up to the table and continued talking to himself about how he had some kind of power, but couldn't use it properly. Here, Leo, without thinking, hit the carpet with his furry paw and meowed something, and finally said that he had given a gift. And so the Duke stood before the Countess, and himself did not understand how it happened. The girl asked how he got in if there was a cat there just a minute ago. The Duke wanted to answer her something, but she hastened to cover his mouth with her hand. She heard footsteps outside her bedroom door, and this alerted her. In this moment of silence, the Duke had the opportunity to enjoy the beauty of the Countess. When the girl let go of her hand, the Duke began to lament that he understood how it all happened. He sat down on the bed and said that Leo had arranged all this using his ability to teleport. Julian looked at the Countess and continued that they were soulmates with the cat and could change bodies. Then Rebecca asked why he couldn't go back the same way. But the Duke explained that it was not as simple as it seemed at first glance. Teleportation takes a lot of energy and it is impossible to immediately use it back. You need to recuperate for about 3 hours. The Countess asked him to promise that as soon as his strength was restored, the Duke would immediately return to his home. He said, of course, because it was not safe for him here, and he was not going to put the Countess in danger. But then he said that they could talk about their joint affairs for now, and asked how she would be if she needed to go out. The Countess said that she tries to think through all possible situations. The Duke was slightly drunk and really wanted to talk. During the conversation, he once again reminded the Countess that they had 3 hours to talk, and then he laughed and said that he would try not to bother the girl too much with his presence. It was deep night. The moon was shining, and the barely audible chirping of insects could be heard from the open window. The Duke said that the trade guild would soon be ready, and the Countess would need to be there. But she didn't go. She showed her injured leg and said that there is a way out of everything. The main thing is not at the cost of her life. And then she added that in order to become free from the Count, she was ready to take risks and try any path. Rebecca added sadly that the hardest part was making the decision to leave. The Duke looked at her and realized that the Countess was a very deep and sincere person. He clarified that she was so upset that she was ready to risk her life by pretending to be wounded in order to avoid contact with the Count. But then he perked up and said that he would do his utmost to shorten her suffering. Rebecca lightly ruffled the Duke's hair and said that she had not made a mistake when she asked him for help. He took her hand in his, and silence hung in the air. From the outside, they looked like a couple in love. And just a little bit the Duke wanted to kiss Madame. But suddenly, a kitten was lying on the bed in front of Rebecca and licking its paw. She grabbed the kitten in her arms and was surprised that 3 hours had really flown by so quickly. And the Duke, in a state of confusion, found himself on his bed. He fell onto the soft bed, covered his eyes with his hands, and thought for a long time about his sudden meeting with the Countess. Meanwhile, a new day had dawned somewhere nearby. At the table sat Croa and a cute girl who was speaking and trying to cause a scandal. The girl persistently reminded that she was supposed to be a front person for the trade guild. But Croa did not give up and said that he did not decide, but only carried out what the Duke told him. Here the guy choked on the coffee he had drunk because the girl threatened to tell that a clump of Leo's fur had been pulled out. The girl said that the Duke would now understand why he had recently gone bald and who was to blame for it. Croa had no choice but to share everything he knew and bring the girl up to speed. The next day, Jeffrey said goodbye to his wives as he had to leave on business. He apologized to Rebecca because she was now having difficulty moving in a wheelchair. Alicia was told not to get involved in scandals like the one with the beatings the other day. She smiled in response. Jeffrey told the girls to get along and not fight with each other until he arrived. Here, Rebecca realized about yesterday's conversation with Julian that the opening of the trade guild was coming soon, and she had the opportunity to leave. The Duke said at night that everything would be ready any day now. Before she could even send the Count on his trip, she was already all smiles about her upcoming plans. Returning to her chambers, Kana handed her a note. The note stated that the acting head of the trade guild was waiting for the lady for discussion and opening. And then she remembered that when they were seeing Jeffrey off, there was a maid on the street besides them. She was the spitting image of the Countess in appearance. After some time, the Countess knocked at the indicated address. The young girl opened the door cordially and invited us in. She was very embarrassed when she saw the Countess in front of her. Rebecca introduced herself in response and said she wanted to talk about the trade guild. The girl sheepishly said that she was the figurehead who was acting as the guild leader. The Countess sat down and said that the main partner here was a girl, and she had simply come to meet him. The young girl looked and was surprised that the conversation went so easily. She thought that she would have to fight hard to win it back. The Countess asked under what conditions the girl would agree to sign a contract. This surprised the girl even more, because her brother said that the Countess was twisting the Duke around her finger. Rebecca offered a fairly favorable percentage of the proceeds, since she would only be an informant. The girl was pleasantly surprised and, of course, agreed without the slightest hesitation. The Countess handed over a sheet of paper and said that it was a list of things that would soon become very expensive. After reading the list, the girl was a little confused, because some items were not even available. And the second point is that why is the Countess so sure that anyone will even ask about these positions? Rebecca laughed and said that she could consider her a psychic, but soon someone would be found who would buy her. Then she added that the girl would need to establish sales, but also make it so that some items could only be purchased from them. The girl said that she would try to fully justify the trust placed in her. Rebecca apologized, but said that she didn't have any more time and had to run. As she said goodbye, the Countess smiled broadly and said that all reports could be passed on to the Duke. The girl was very surprised, because she had heard that the Countess was too demanding, but it turned out not to be so. According to his brother and rumors, the relationship between the Duke and the Countess was quite complicated. Meanwhile, the Duke was holding negotiations with His Imperial Majesty. He, in turn, was very surprised by the Duke's sudden arrival. The Duke said he had decided to renounce the church. The Emperor was surprised by this decision, since he had repeatedly urged him to do this, but he only asked why all of a sudden. He said with a smile that a person appeared who pushed him towards this decision. The Duke remembered that he had a lot of gold in his hands, but this did not help him get rid of his fear of being nobody without a gift. And days earlier, Rebecca had shown him by her own example that change requires desire first and foremost. The conversation continued in a very calm and interesting manner for everyone. The Emperor said that he was always happy with such things and waved something to his butlers. The Emperor inquired about the exact methods and what exactly the Duke would do now. Julian looked and said that a new seed of religion needed to be sown. Then he showed a newspaper where it was described in detail that Papa Desracino. This newspaper described in great detail how a church minister had already married for the 5th time. But before that, his current wife was engaged to the famous artist Berenice. The Emperor took the newspaper and concluded that the Pope did this because he had influence. Julian confirmed this, but said that he could not cope in this situation alone. The Emperor asked what he needed, and he added that the Imperial Mont Blanc Club would help. As he left the Emperor, Julian reproached himself for not having done this earlier. Croa asked what the Countess's influence was on him again, but the Duke was no longer listening to him. Meanwhile, after the conversation, Rebecca was slowly walking down the street. A few blocks away, a boy was walking his mother to work. The girl came to her bakery. The young man said that a customer was already waiting for her. The girl saw Rebecca and was a little stunned. Rebecca said very joyfully and sweetly that Margaret's place was very cozy. But the girl wasn't particularly in the mood for dialogue and said that she was interrupting her work, especially without warning. Rebecca responded with understanding that she knew everything, but otherwise no one would have let her into the city alone. She remembers that Margaret used to hate Rebecca Devonshire, but she personally has no ill will towards her. In the girl's house, there was a huge statue of the goddess Daphne, which Devonshire wanted. But when the Count came to buy the statue, the girl's father refused him, and immediately after this, the mansion was engulfed in a terrible fire. No one in the family survived that fire except Margaret herself. Rebecca said she came with an offer and an opportunity to expand her business. The Countess took the girl by the hand and sincerely wanted to offer help and receive support. But Margaret pulled her hand away and said that she was perfectly capable of managing on her own without any handouts. Rebecca understood her, but she also wanted to repay her for her help. After all, when the Countess had a daughter in that life, Margaret helped her with homemade food. She thanked him for the tea and said that she might think about the offer. They said goodbye sweetly, and the Countess said that it was time for her to go. Margaret gave her some pies to take with her, and Rebecca decided that since she couldn't take them back to the estate, she should at least try them. But suddenly, at some point, she felt someone grab her by the shoulder. She jerked forward to answer the offender, but Julian stood in front of her. Rebecca asked in horror how the Duke had ended up in the same place where she was again. He asked her to go to the carriage, which was standing nearby, and there he looked at her and thought whether he should tell her what he had done. But then Croa's voice was heard and said that he had bought everything that the Duke had asked for. And then food appeared in the carriage, which can only be bought at the market. Rebecca was interested in the food, and it was hard to hide it. The Duke offered the lady to taste at least something. She wanted to refuse, but her stomach said otherwise. Julian suggested trying the most delicious shashlik according to the local people. She modestly took it and said that if it was just a small piece, then why not try it? The Duke looked at the Countess, and it seemed as if he was looking at a small child who was eating greedily. Having caught her breath a little, the girl laughed and said that she hadn't eaten anything more delicious for a long time, but she was screaming to go back. The very tired Countess moved slowly towards the house, but then her reverie was interrupted by suspicions that it seemed she had returned at the wrong time. And her fears were justified. Geoffrey's carriage was standing near the entrance. He returned earlier than expected. Upon entering the palace, he immediately asked the butler if the Countess was in her room. He replied that she was resting and needed to be warned, but the Count said that he would do everything himself. But suddenly, he froze on the stairs as he heard someone else enter Rebecca's room. He didn't like it and found it suspicious. As soon as the Count opened the door to his wife's bedroom, she immediately threw herself on his neck and said that she missed him very much. The first thing the Count asked was how she walked if her leg hurt. The girl said that she had secretly been exercising her leg a little and could now move around without a wheelchair. The Count hugged the girl and also said that he missed her and was glad that she was getting better. Canna was standing in the corner of the room, and it was she who confused the Count. No one came here except the servants. Rebecca laughed and asked why her husband had returned early. The Count immediately caught her by her words and clarified that there was dissatisfaction in her voice, which meant she was not happy. She laughed and said that he seemed to be doing it. On the contrary, she was very happy. He accepted her answer and smiled. Then he came closer and said that he had to leave at dawn, and therefore he wanted to spend the evening alone with her. The Count continued that, in order to make things easier for Madame, he would come to her himself. But at that moment, the Countess sneezed. The Count thought for a few seconds, his eyes fixed on one point, and then he decided to leave and said that it would be better to wait until the Countess had fully recovered. Before the door had even closed, Rebecca immediately fell to her knees. Kana got scared and immediately ran up to the Countess. Rebecca said it was okay. She was just tired today. The maid said that she was very worried, that she needed to be more careful, especially since they almost missed the Count's arrival. But their conversation was interrupted by a noise from the closet, and Kana immediately turned around. When they opened the closet, Susan was smiling guiltily from inside. Kana helped her out carefully and apologized for having forgotten about her for a bit, for the inconvenience caused, and for the fact that she had coped with her role as a countess. Rebecca gave her a necklace. Meanwhile, left alone, Rebecca simply looked out the windows, and her thoughts were very far away. She recalled her meeting with Julian and found herself thinking about the Duke very often. And late at night, sitting in his cabin, Geoffrey still could not let go of the thought that his wife had become different. He recalled that when he hugged the Countess, she smelled rather unpleasant, but he couldn't understand what that strange smell was, because she wasn't supposed to go anywhere. Suddenly, he realized that he could smell sweat from her. This made him very angry, and he began to suspect that his wife was up to no good. He decided he needed to protect himself and pulled the cord. The head maid appeared at the threshold of his office, and he said that he needed to act sooner than he had expected, something he had been putting off for a long time. Geoffrey decided to go out and take a walk and met Alicia on the stairs. She stood in the semi-darkness and stroked her pregnant belly. Then she approached Geoffrey and said that the child also wanted to hear his father's voice before leaving. She looked at the Count with childish naivety and love. Geoffrey froze in surprise. He didn't even notice when Alicia became so beautiful. The Count first met the girl when he came to the village in search of an artist. When he got out of the carriage, he met Alicia, young and in ordinary clothes. She was a bit confused at the first meeting, or a little tired, but she still had the same big eyes. They had a fleeting affair, and the Count did not promise her anything more. But after a while, the Countess came to introduce him to her new maid. And this new girl turned out to be none other than that same Alicia. The Count was surprised by her persistence in achieving her goals. And after a while, she plucked up the courage and approached him, not being afraid of his wife, and confessed her feelings. And now he looked at her in the moonlight, and she was like something new to him. She smiled sincerely and childishly, and the Count also looked at her with affection. But at that moment, in the semi-darkness, Rebecca's silhouette appeared in a nightgown. The Count put his arm around Alicia's shoulders and invited her to follow him to her room. Rebecca was sitting on the bed, wearing a beautiful nightgown, when Kana came in and said that the Count and the maid had entered the room. The next day, the girls were chatting alone, and Rebecca was giving Alicia advice that she had a trump card. She said the girl took the advice last night and it worked. The night ghost helped them get closer. But then came the day of the Count's departure for a long stay with the Emperor, and everyone came out to say goodbye. Rebecca stood sadly, and Kana said that the lady cried all night because she could not find the Count anywhere. But then Geoffrey said he wanted to give his wives gifts before he left. The girls stood there in confusion. This was not like their husband. But at some point, the girls found themselves in handcuffs. Geoffrey said that they would have these bracelets until he returned, and only the head maid had the key. He only allows removal in cases of extreme necessity. Anger, rage, humiliation. A whole spectrum of incomprehensible emotions engulfed Rebecca, but she remained silent. Some time later, Robert Crowley came to her for a long-awaited visit. He said that he had found a man from the mysterious island who had managed to escape. Robert said that no one had ever managed to escape from there. On this island, Geoffrey holds hostage the relatives of those who serve as his hounds. But the trail of this man was lost, and at the moment, Robert does not know where to look. Rebecca was a little upset. She was really looking forward to this man, and maybe he gave them another clue. Robert said that he would still try to find any information about him. Then the Countess leaned closer to the guy and asked if he was a good liar. Robert was surprised by the question, but Rebecca explained that he needed to develop a rumor that she was a saint among hounds. He needs to be convincingly told that she has the gift of seeing the future and finding out what happened in the past. Meanwhile, somewhere in the laboratory, the botanist Mr. McQueen was working. Sometime earlier, Julian had brought him here and provided him with everything he needed to work peacefully. He was terribly surprised by such generosity and asked what he owed for such an opportunity, but the Duke did not demand payment. He was also provided with food, and there were dishes to suit every taste. He felt like he was in a sanatorium, but there was a catch somewhere. He worked for days without sleep. And just as I was about to lie down, Julian appeared on the threshold and asked if there was any result of the work so that he could sleep. The growing period for the Devil's Claw herb was no more than 2 months, and such a sudden change frightened the botanist. But finally, everything worked out for him, and even in less time than planned. It was as if Julian sensed it and appeared on the threshold of the laboratory. He took a pot of grown grass. He said thank you, and then added that he was entitled to payment for his work and handed over a bag of money. Machvin looked at the bag full of coins and didn't understand. First, the Duke yelled at him, and now he generously gave him gifts. He's strange. The Duke said that the botanist was a good fellow, and now he could be entrusted with the next task. Julian asked if McQueen knew the rose grape variety. He replied that, of course, he knew, since this variety was patented by the Count. Julian said that he needed to study the grapes very carefully and make them poisonous. And he has a week to complete this mission. The botanist looked at the Duke with a nervous smile on his face. Meanwhile, the Count's hounds, led by Robert, were chatting in the courtyard. As Rebecca had asked, the boy began to spread rumors that the Countess was a saint. Robert said that the incident happened to him precisely after the Countess warned him to be careful. He continued that, in appearance, she resembled a goddess, so beautiful and gentle. But not everyone in this company had the same opinion. One said that it was all a lie and Robert's invention. But then the third servant joined in and said that he, too, had noticed some strange things in her behavior. He remembered that Rebecca had told him that he needed to be careful about everything that touched the sky. As she was leaving, she turned around and said that trials are always given to ordinary people. It was at that moment that the guy didn't pay any attention to her words, but simply followed her with his eyes. But after a while, something actually fell straight from the sky onto the path in front of the guy. They continued to discuss the situation heatedly, as if proving something to each other. Robert watched as the boys took up the invented legend. It was already deep night, and the moon was lighting up the sky. Rodrigo came to Rebecca's chambers. He and Robert were Count Geoffrey's hound. When asked to whom he wanted to swear allegiance, he calmly replied that it was to her and no one else. Meanwhile, somewhere in a luxurious residence, the famous artist was painting his picture. The Earl of Devonshire observed this entire situation, but he couldn't understand why. If he was assigned to watch the work, there was a guard in the room. He fell onto the bed and began to think that this was more like an exile, and he was like a prisoner. But he suddenly remembered something, and his hand reached into his breast pocket. He held the medallion with Rebecca's image in his hands and thought that he wished he were with her now, not here. The next day, the artist found the Count at his easel. He praised him for his beautiful sketches and said that even these pencil sketches conveyed the Countess beautifully. The Count put down his pencil and said that everything he did was terrible, much worse than the master had taught him. But the artist Veronique continued to insist that the Count was slandering himself in vain. But suddenly, Gaff looked angrily and asked how he knew that this was a portrait of the Countess, since the face was not yet visible. The artist proudly replied that all talented people wanted the Countess to be their muse, and it was not necessarily her face. Then he looked at the Count and said that he, like Rebecca, had quite ideal features. Geoffrey didn't like this and slapped the artist, saying that he was not a piece of art. The artist threw up his hands and said that he didn't mean it that way, but he had a very interesting proposal. The man invited the Count to also become a face in his new painting. The artist began to give many arguments about what exactly fame could give him and how his life would change. Geoffrey was quick to decline, adding that he didn't want to be used as a model. But after much persuasion and explanation from the artist, the Count began to think about it. He imagined that even more people would know about him, and his face would become priceless as fine art. The only thing that tormented the Count most was the deadline. He really wanted to know how long he would be here. Meanwhile, Julian was already reading a letter from Veronique, which said that the Count agreed to be imprisoned for the sake of art. The Duke was angry and told the servant that the Count needed to be locked up without food or drink, and preferably for life imprisonment. He gave the letter to the artist and said that Devonshire's security needed to be further strengthened so that he would understand what imprisonment meant. Julian walked through the bullfighting ring and thought that imprisonment would be a torment for the Count, and he would understand what Rebecca felt. He suddenly stopped with a glass of wine by the window and wondered what the Countess might be doing now. He imagined this sweet and tender image of a woman that turned his consciousness upside down. But suddenly, a sharp, suffocating pain pierced him in the chest area. He walked up to the table and pulled out a bottle of medicine from the top drawer. He poured a handful of white tablets into his palm and swallowed them immediately. Julian sat down in a chair and began to think that this pain was getting stronger each time, and he needed to rescue the Countess faster. And then his gaze fell on the wine label. This bottle of wine was made from a grape variety patented by Devonshire. And then the Duke laughed to himself and said that even if the Count returned from exile, his life would never be the same. And at this time, somewhere in the Count's castle, Rebecca wandered down the corridor, thinking about the work she had done and counting how many hounds she had managed to lure to her side. Only Knight Bays and the headmaid remained, who were too loyal to the Count. All those who took the side of the Countess, Rodrigo, have relatives whom the Count holds hostage, but the other three have debt relationships, and there is one more person about whom nothing could be found out. Rebecca wondered if she had done something wrong, or if it was all about people trusting the Count so blindly, but she decided to go out for a walk and heard a noise. On the stairs, Alicia insistently demanded that the headmaid remove the handcuffs, but she was adamant and said that there were no circumstances under which she should take away the Count's gift. The girl said that these bracelets rubbed her hands, and the amazing scratches were just the reason to take them off. But the maid said that the shell could not rub, and if Alicia did not calm down, she would be forced to punish her. Realizing that the girl would not achieve anything, she decided to leave, but said that the maid would be very sorry. At that moment, Rebecca came out from around the corner and tried to pretend she hadn't heard anything. The women walked towards each other like bitter enemies, but at the same time, they tried to smile a little. As they passed, the maid dropped the phrase that she had only closed her eyes twice. Rebecca turned and asked her what she meant. The maid repeated that nothing would escape her notice in this palace, and that she would not report the Count to the Countess's violations. Rebecca asked why there was suddenly such leniency towards her. The headmaid recalled that when her daughter was ill, it was the Countess who persuaded the Count to allow her to stay with her, but she reminded him once again that she had only promised to close her eyes 3 times, and 2 of them had already expired. A little later, the maid said that the Countess was too special and not like everyone else, but she will not report the rumor that she considers herself a saint to the Count, as she should have done. Rebecca said that it was not necessary, and she did not care, but asked why the maid was so attached to this house. She hesitated and said that her parents had invested a lot in these lands, and she considered it her duty to serve this house. Rebecca decided to say goodbye to the maid with this information, but reminded her that she owed her one more wish. Entering her bedroom, the Countess was stunned by what she saw. On the floor, Kana fought with Julian, the maid raising her blade over the Duke. They were so busy with their fuss that they didn't notice the Countess until she asked them to explain what was going on. Meanwhile, events take us to the estate of Rebecca's parents. The mother was very confused. She really wanted to help her daughter as quickly as possible. At that moment, Theo, the woman's husband, entered the room with a very confused face. He asked if his beloved wife had another man, since she began leaving home so often. He was literally crying and saying that he wouldn't be able to live if his wife left him. But the woman said that her husband was talking nonsense and behaving like a capricious child. Rebecca's 2 daughters and sisters also entered the room and wanted to calm their father down. They unanimously said that their mother earns money and their father distracts her with empty talk. The woman had to say that her daughters were telling the truth, but that was the only thing she could say now. She asked her husband to get up from his knees and stop crying, that she was not cheating on him and everything was fine. Meanwhile, the trade guild was getting its first big client. Rebecca's mother came to check on the situation with the salt, They decided not to order any more vases from the supplier. Tanisha was proud of herself. She was doing well at everything, and especially after receiving a letter with instructions and parting words from the Countess, I felt even more confident. And then the day came when that very buyer came. Today, the deal was supposed to take place. Devonshire vineyards are under attack by aphids, threatening to destroy the harvest. The only way to save the harvest is with the help of ladybugs, but it turns out they are nowhere to be found. Tanisha's trading guild is the only one that deals with their sale. The girl, having listened to the man's wish, immediately drew a sum with several zeros for him on a piece of paper. But he started grumbling and shouting that this was robbery, and she was trying to profit from it. But the girl was convincing in her arguments. There would soon be a festival, and the harvest was needed to make wine. Moreover, the owner of the vineyard is the Earl of Devonshire himself, and he will not just leave it if the grapes are lost. In conclusion, he added that it was easier to pay the amount she was asking for than to wait until he was killed because of the loss of the grapes. The deal was successful, and the girl sent word to the Duke that the shipment was complete. At that moment, the Holy Father came to the Duke. The Duke wanted to joke about his family life, but remembered that his fifth wife was now with an artist. Leo came to the men and greeted the Reverend in a cat-like manner. He took his magic staff and said, so as not to delay, he would begin. He shone the light on the cat, who closed his eyes as if with pleasure. The procedure took place every month, but each time the Duke was dissatisfied. The priest laughed and said that this time everything went much faster, and Leo was even calmer. He wanted to pet the cat, but it hissed and almost bit the man. And the Duke said that every time the church performs this ritual, his life is shortened. The Holy Father tried to change the subject to the Duke's need for heirs, but he said that since everything was done, he preferred to go about his business. The Holy Father gladly decided to accompany him, so that he could perhaps continue the conversation that the Duke was avoiding. When the question was asked about children, the Duke quickly turned the matter to the Holy One, saying that there were so many wives and not a single heir. As they were going down the stairs, the men heard a noise and noticed a crowd of men. There were stones of fate that, for any donation, would tell how successful the day would be. All this happened near the casino. A fairly large line had gathered and was kicking one man, because of whom everything stopped. Croa asked if anyone still believed in these stones, and then lost everything in the church casino. While the men were discussing, an assistant approached the bishop and whispered something in his ear. The man said goodbye politely and said that he had urgent business to attend to. Julian turned to Leo and asked what had happened. Leo said nonchalantly that the bishop had heard news that the countess might be a saint. The Duke asked which countess they were talking about, because if it was Rebecca, then he was hearing this news for the first time. Meanwhile, in the countess's chambers, there was a delegation from the retinue of clergy and Robert Crowley. The bishop said that now he would turn to the amulet and prayers, and everything would immediately become clear. The countess was reflected in the amulet like a mirror.